So as we have done till 194D, today let us start discussing with something called as DA, section 194DA. So the next section is going to be section 194DA. So what is this? Let us see. So section 190, yeah,
Sir,
one second. Yeah. So 194DA. So let us focus on what is 194DA and what is the provision regarding 194DA. Let us see. One second. Yeah. Here, payment in respect of life insurance policy. So the provision is applicable wherever we need to make any sort of payment. Payment payment in respect of life insurance policy. So there is a life insurance policy. So against the life insurance policy, if any amount is paid, means what? You have taken a life insurance policy. The policy is matured. So at the time of maturing the policy, the insurance company will pay you some money. So whenever the insurance company is paying the money to the policy holder, then 194DA comes into play. So here, as every section will be having a payer and every section will be having a payee. For this section, who is the payer? Life insurance company is the payer. Any life insurance company will become the payer. And who is the payee? The payee for this purpose is nothing but a resident policy holder. Any person who is called as a resident policy holder. So ultimately 194DA is going to be applicable. So policy holder. What this LIC is making payment? LIC is making payment of what? LIC is making payment under life insurance policy. Is making payment under life insurance policy. Then this provision is going to be applicable. Here, this is an amendment again. So as it is an amendment, this will be very, very important from your examination point of view. Okay. Now, what is the amendment? Here, with effect from 1st September 2019, with effect from 1st September 2019, 5% is the rate of TDS. TDS rate is going to be 5%. Before this date, the rate was 1%. Now we need not discuss about this 1% because the revised rate is what? The revised rate of TDS is going to be 5%. Is there any exemption? Yes. If the amount paid by the life insurance corporation, amount paid does not exceed 1 lakh, then no TDS. So in this following circumstances, TDS is not required to be deducted as the amount of payment does not exceed 1 lakh. If it exceeds 1 lakh, 5% is the rate of TDS with effect from 1st September 2019. Earlier that was 1%, that has been revised to 5%. That's it. That's what is 194DA. That's it. Okay. Now let us quickly move on to the next section. Okay. So the next section is something called as 194E. Let us see. What is 194E? To whom this section is applicable? Let us try to understand. Section 194E. Okay. Section 194E. As every section is having a payer and payee. So even this section is having a responsible person called as payer and the other person someone called as payee. Let us see. First of all, to whom this section applies? Whenever you are making any sort of payments to someone called as non-resident. Who is that non-resident? The non-resident sportsman. So he is a non-resident sportsman or sports association. So whenever you are making payment to non-resident sportsmen or non-resident sports association, then this provision is going to be applicable. Any payment, say suppose Now it's the time of IPL. So a lot of foreign players are coming to India. They may be acting in some sort of advertisement, say Pollard or whatever it is. So they may be acting in some sort of advertisements in India. So the person who is shooting the advertisement, the sponsorer will make a payment to Pollard or whoever foreign player they are coming. So ultimately what will happen? So the person making payment 194 is applicable because he is making payment to a non-resident and the non-resident is someone called as a sports person. Then 194E is going to be applicable. Not only add, say Pollard is writing some sort of articles in Indian magazines. So he's writing some sort of articles about his experience in IPL or whatever it is. So the magazine is giving him some sort of payment. Even then 194E is going to be applicable. So here payer will be there and payee will be there. For this purpose, the payee is nothing but non-resident sportsman or non-resident sport association. So what is the rate of TDS? The TDS rate is going to be 20% is the rate of TDS. So 20% plus you need to also apply something called as your surcharge. You need to also apply something called as your cess. So the total TDS in this case will be 20% plus surcharge plus also cess component. So the total will be called as a rate of TDS. When time of TDS, when you are supposed to do the TDS at the time of payment, at the time of payment or credit, at the time of payment or credit, whichever is earlier, you need to make a payment under 194E. That's it. So 194E is very simple. Whenever any payment is made to a foreign person and that foreign person is someone called as a non-resident sportsman or non-resident sports association, then ultimately 194E is applicable. The payer has to deduct 20% as the rate of TDS. That's it. So then the other section is also very small section. Section 194EE, which is nothing but section 194EE. What is this? This section is nothing but you are any sort of payment is happening in respect of payment is happening in respect of payment is happening 1 second in respect of, give me 1 minute. Yeah, so payment is happening in respect of deposit, in respect of deposit under National Savings Scheme. There is something called as NSS, National Savings Scheme. So payment in respect of deposit under National Savings Scheme. So here, let us see what is the point here to be considered. Okay, any person who is responsible for what? Responsible for paying, okay, for paying any person. So here the payee can be any person, an amount. So from what? An amount from National Savings Scheme in accordance with the section under 80 CCA. So there is something called as 80 CCA. In accordance with that, you are doing some sort of investment, you can take the deduction. So from the National Savings Scheme, you are getting some sort of money. So ultimately, this payee is the investor. He has invested some money in the National Savings Scheme. So this person is getting the money from the National Savings Scheme. Then ultimately, TDS has to be deducted. TDS will be deducted at what? 10% is the rate of TDS. When TDS is not required, no TDS is required if payment does not exceed 2,500. Payment from National Savings Scheme does not exceed what? Does not exceed rupees 2,500 during the financial year. So 2,500 during the financial year. So it is 2,500. during the financial year, no TDS is required. So in this following case, you need not deduct any sort of TDS. That's what is 194 EE. Then the next section is also very simple, which is something called as section 194G. What is 194G? Commission on sale of something called as lottery tickets. Any person who is selling lottery tickets, if that person is getting any sort of commission, then 194G says TDS is compulsory. TDS rate is going to be 5%. No TDS when if commission does not exceed rupees 15,000. Commission does not exceed rupees 15,000 during the financial year. So ultimately, no need to deduct any sort of TDS. If the commission does not exceed 15,000, TDS has to be deducted at the rate of 5%. That's what is 194G. Now, the next section is H. Even this 194H is also speaking about commission. So what this section says? This section says either it is a commission or it is something called as a brokerage. Either it is a commission or it is a brokerage. Now, payer. Who is the payer and who is the payee? Payee for this purpose, again, he should be a resident. He should be resident SSC. He can be anyone. Individual, HUF, firm, AOP, etc., etc. But who is the payer? Payer, for this purpose, it says any SSC. He could be any SSC other than whom? Individual and HUF. Even individual HUF are covered if they are covered under tax audit. So other than individual HUF, what is this individual HUF is doing? Not covered under tax audit, which is nothing but under section 44AB. So under section 44AB, that's it. So based upon this section 44AB, so if you are not covered under 44AB, then ultimately 194H is not applicable to you. If you are covered under 44AB, 194H is also applicable. So what is the rate of TDS? If this section is applicable, the rate of TDS is going to be 5%. The rate of TDS is going to be 5%. No TDS when? No TDS if does not exceed, the commission or brokerage does not exceed rupees 15,000 during the financial year. So if it does not exceed 15,000, no TDS. If it exceeds 15,000, TDS is required to be deducted. That's what is 194H. Okay, so that's what is something called as 194H. Now we are about to coming to the ending now. So now let us see the other deduction, which is nothing but, let us see. One second, give me 1 second.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, 1 second, 1 second. Okay, the next section is nothing but 194I. Section 194I. Again, this is very important. Why? Because there is some sort of amendment in section 194I. So ultimately 194I is very, very important. Now let us see what is section 194I. Okay, so 194I is nothing but payment of rent. Payment of rent. So whenever any SSC is making payment of rent, whenever any person is making payment of rent, then 194I is going to be applicable. Now, let us see. For every section, we'll be having payer. For every section, we'll be having payee. Who is the payee here? Payee is nothing but a resident. Payee is nothing but a resident. So payee here is what? Payee is nothing but the owner of the property. Payer is nothing but the tenant of the property. Okay. Payee should be the owner of the property. Who is tenant here? Tenant can be any SSC, any SSC, any SSC other than individual and HUF. Why we are leaving individual HUF? Because individual HUF are not covered under tax audit under section 44AB. If this individual HUF are covered under tax audit, then ultimately, even for the individual HUF, 194I becomes applicable. Now, what this payer is paying? This tenant is paying to the owner every month some amount of rent. If the rent exceeds 2,40,000 per annum, if the rent exceeds something called as 2,40,000 per annum, then ultimately TDS is supposed to be deducted. This is the amendment. Earlier, the limit was not 2,40,000. Earlier, the limit was 1,80,000. So 1,80,000 has been increased to 2,40,000. Okay. So whenever tenant is paying a rent to the owner, if the amount of rent is exceeding 2,40,000, then TDS is to be deducted. What is the rate of TDS? Rate of TDS. What is the rate of TDS? We are having two rates. One, if you are paying rent for a building or rent for a land, okay, or rent for a furniture, the rate of TDS is different. If you are paying rent for plant and machinery, the rate of TDS is different. In the first case, the rate of TDS is going to be 8% is nothing but the rate of TDS. Whereas in the second case, 2% is nothing but the rate of TDS. When same time of TDS is same for all the provisions, time of deduction. What is the time of deduction? At the time of payment or credit to the account, whichever is earlier, within that period, you are supposed to deduct the TDS. That's what is something called as for 194I. Okay, so just take it down. So once this is done, we'll move on to the next. Other few sections are there. With that, I can say we are about to finish off your TDS chapter. So the next section is nothing but 194IA. Okay, let us see what is this, when this section is applicable. Let us try to understand. Yeah. So 194IA. Section number 194IA. Let us see what is this. This is nothing but payment on transfer. You are transferring. What you are transferring? Payment on transfer of certain immovable property. Certain immovable property you are transferring. And what is that property? It could be any immovable property other than agriculture land. If that immovable property is an agriculture land, then 194IA is not going to be applicable. So payer is there, payee is there. Payer, what? Buyer. Payee, seller. What he is selling? He is selling something called as immovable property. He is selling something called as immovable property. Now, what the payer will do? For buying this immovable property, this person will pay some sort of consideration. Now, what this section says, if the consideration does not exceed, rupees 50 lakhs, no TDS. But if the consideration exceeds 50 lakhs, if the consideration exceeds 50 lakhs, then exceeds rupees 50 lakhs, then TDS is deductible. What is the rate of TDS there? The rate of TDS is going to be 1 Now, even there is a slight change to this with effect from, again, this is an amendment with effect from 1st September 2019, I guess. Yeah, 1st September 2019. What it says, consideration shall include. Now, with effect from 1st September 2019, there was a notification given which is inserted by the Finance Act 2019, Finance Act number 2, second Finance Act. Okay, so what this is, this says consideration includes what? Consideration includes all charges in nature of club membership fees. Say, if the immovable property which the seller is selling to you, that includes something called as a club membership fee. You are buying a property in the township. For that, you need to pay some sort of membership fees. If the buyer is paying any sort of membership fees, that membership fees will also be forming part of your consideration. Not only membership fees, few township will charge something called as a parking fee. If this buyer is paying membership fee, even that is also forming part of your consideration. If this buyer is paying something called as parking fees, even that is also considered as your this. Apart from that, any sort of fees for any facility, if you are getting any facility, say few township will be having gym, few township will be having yoga center in the township itself. So if you are paying any amount for any facility or even maintenance, whatever it is, so all these things will be forming part of the consideration. So that's what is the addition with which the Finance Act 2019 has brought to the section 194IA. That's it. So now let us move on to 194IB. Let us see what is 194IB. Section 194IB. What is this? Section 194IB, let us see what is this here. Payment of rent. See, even 194 IB is also speaking about something called as payment of rent. Okay, by whom? By certain individuals, not all, certain individuals and HUF. What is the difference between 194I and 194IB? If you go to 194I, it says individual and HF are not covered. Individual HF will be covered only if they are subject to tax audit. Okay, if they are not covered under tax audit, 194I is not going to be applicable. Whereas 194 IB specifically says this section is applicable only to an individual and only to an HUF, certain, not all the people. Let us now try to understand this section here. So, payer, payment of rent. Who is the payer? As every section you are having a payer and payee. For this section, the payer is nothing but individual or HUF. So payer is nothing but individual or HUF. So the payer is simply speaking individual or HUF. Let us see. We'll discuss this provision, then we'll look into a small example. Then you can easily understand the difference between 194I as well as 194IB. Now, okay, here, what is the rate of tax deduction when tax is not required to be deducted? Let us see. Okay, so here, let us try to understand. Payer is making payment of rent. Okay, and the rent does not exceed, rupees 50,000 per month. It's not per annum. The rent does not exceed 50,000 per month. And what 194 IB says, individual or HUF not covered, under section 194I. Who are not covered under 194I? So simply speaking, individual and HUF not covered under tax audit. Any sort of individual HUF not covered under tax audit and paying a rent of more than 10,000, then TDS is to be deducted at the rate of 5% per annum. So the rate of TDS is going to be 5%. So 5% is the amount of TDS which you are supposed to deduct. Now, let us try to see a small example, small problem. With this, let us try to understand this 194 IB. So let us consider Mr. X. Mr. X, a salaried individual. A salaried individual. So ultimately, as we are calling him as a salaried individual, means what? As he is called as a salaried individual, he is not covered under 44AB, because 44AB is applicable only if you do a business or if you do a profession. As you are doing a salary, 44AB you are not covered. So Mr. X, a salaried individual, what he is doing? Pays rent of rupees 60,000 per month. Rent of rupees 60,000 per month to Mr. Y. Rent of rupees 60,000 per month to Mr. Y. Okay, to Mr. Y he is paying that. Now, from June, so from when he is paying? From June 2019, this person is paying the rent. Now, okay, is he required to deduct the tax? Is he required to deduct the tax at source? That's what is one key question which we have to consider. Now, what 194 IB says? Whenever any individual or HUF not covered under tax audit pays a rent of more than 50,000 per month, in that case, he need to deduct a TDS of 5%. Now, what is the rent paid? 60,000. For the entire year, what is the rent paid? April, May, he is not occupying. He is occupying the property from June. That means the rent is paid for how many months? 10 months. So the total rent paid is what? Total rent paid is 6 lakhs. So as it is exceeding 50, you need to deduct a TDS of 5%. So 6 lakhs into 5%, that gives you 30,000 rupees per month. Sorry, 30,000 rupees is the amount of TDS which is supposed to be deducted. So 30,000 rupees is the TDS which is required to be deducted. Now, let us try to take an other scenario. Same problem. Mr. X vacate building. Mr. X vacates the building on December 2019. In the month of December 2019, this person vacated the building. Then what is the TDS? 60,000 rupees per month. For how many months? Only for a 7 months. June, July, August, September, October, November, and December. So total there are 7 months. So as he is paying the rent for 7 months, you need to deduct the TDS for the 7 months. So ultimately, 60,000 into 7, 4,20,000. 4,20,000 into 5%, that is going to give you 21,000 is nothing but the TDS. Now, the other important part of the problem is when it is 5%, PAN number available. If the PAN number of the owner is available, then it is 5%. PAN number not available, the TDS rate is going to be 20%. So if the PAN is not there, you need to deduct the tax at 20%. Okay, so that's what is something called as 194 IB. So with this, we had also finished 194 IB. Now, let us move on to, of course, IC is not much important, so I'm not going into 194 IC. So now let us see 194J. Section 194J. What is section 194J? Professional charges, professional fees. Fees for professional service. Fees for professional or technical service. Whenever any person who is called as payer is making payment of professional or technical fees. To whom? To someone called as payer. Sorry, payee. To someone called as payee. Then ultimately section 194J becomes attracted. Here, who is the payer? Same. He could be any SSC other than any SSC other than individual or HUF. This individual or HUF is not covered under section 44AB, same as the other sections. Okay, so any sort of individual or HUF not covered under tax audit. Here, if the same individual HUF are covered under tax audit, ultimately what happens? If the same individual or HUF are covered under tax audit, ultimately that will be a subject matter of 194J. Okay, that will be a subject matter of 194J. Now, if these conditions are satisfied, then TDS is supposed to be deducted. So what is the rate of TDS? TDS rate is equal to 10%. So 10% is nothing but the rate of TDS. 10% is nothing but your rate of TDS, which is going to be applicable over there. Then, so rate of TDS is that. Then no TDS. When TDS is not required to be deducted, if this total payment does not exceed rupees 30,000 during the financial year, then TDS is not required to be deducted. If that exceeds 30,000, then TDS is required to be deducted at a rate of 10%. In some cases, the rate of TDS is not 10%, the rate of TDS is going to be 2%. When it is 2%, in respect of a call center, you are running a call center. Okay. So payee is engaged in the business of call center. So here, the person to whom you are making payment is engaged in the business of call center, then the rate of TDS is not 10%, the rate of TDS is going to be 2%. So that's what is nothing but your 194J. So the next section is something called as section 194LA. Section 194LA. So that's what is your other section. Still we have 194M, which is very important because which is a new section. Totally 194M is a new section which has been inserted with the effect from 1st September 2019, inserted by Finance Act 2019. So that's what is one new section we need to understand. So once I am just writing the other sections which are supposed to discuss, 194LA, 194M, which is again very important section. Then we are also having another new section which is purely a recent amendment, which is something called as 194N. Even this 194N is a new amendment, recent amendment. So the recent amendments always have a higher chances to get in your examination. Okay, so then finally we'll be entering into the last section, which is nothing but section 195. So with this, I can say we had totally completed your TDS provisions. So what I will do, these two sections I will take tomorrow. I will cover because these two sections are very important. So I don't want to add the two sections right now today. So these two sections, what I will do, I will take up in the next class tomorrow. So today, let us finish off something called as 194 LA. Let us see what is LA, to whom this LA is going to be applicable. Let us try to understand this LA. Okay, now, so LA is nothing but for all the sections, you will be always having a payer, you will be always having a payee. Now, what the payer is paying? The payer is making payment of something called as compensation. Why he is paying compensation? Because there is something called as compulsory acquisition. The payer has compulsory acquired your property for which the payer is paying you some sort of compensation. So that's there 194 LA is going to be applicable. No TDS. When TDS is not required, no TDS if compensation paid during the year does not exceed, compensation paid during the financial year does not exceed rupees 2,50,000, then no TDS is required to be deducted. Or else, if the compensation exceeds 2,50,000, TDS is required to be deducted at the rate of 10%. So 10% is nothing but the rate of TDS which you are supposed to deduct. That's what is 194 LA. So three sections are left of 194M, 194N as well as 195. With this, I can say the total provisions of TDS are set to be completed. So these three sections will close up in the next session.